under time constraints. So we have no luxury to say we're going to lay it out for 2 weeks or so. We have to do it by statutory deadlines. So that in mind, I would amend paragraph B, where it talks about extraordinary emergency related events. Okay, because we have more than emergency related events. We have to have we have time critical preparation for elections and time critical for counting and tabulating ballots. So I would include that language in there. So it's not extraordinary emergency events. It includes, the emergency preparation of elections and counting and tabulating ballots. So I think that would be an important addition to this time policy because that establishes the reason for the compensatory time.
Are you suggesting we strike the emergency related as well?
Well, you can keep emergency related there and
add in.
add in,
Yeah.
or time, I would have time critical preparation for elections and counting and tabulating ballots.
Now, also Ray did contact me earlier, and I'll let him speak to this, but he pointed out the same thing to me as well in the discussion about the election administration language being put in there. So, but he can add to that when he gets here as well.
Okay. We look forward to his addition.
Do you want to make that in the form
Yeah,
of a motion?
sure. I move. Also move.
And I'll second it. That we
All right.
include that language to reflect time critical matters and matters associated with the tabulation of ballots.
Counting and tabulating.
And if are you okay, Dave, with having the director craft some language? Or do
Sure,
you want to
definitely.
craft the language?
Yeah. I think we
Or whatever I don't know. Mr. Chairman.
I think I think it's simple enough that we can get it down. So let me so the second sentence would be in recognition that occasionally a state of emergency or extraordinary, I guess we strike or, comma, and other extraordinary emergency related events or time critical preparation for elections and tabulation and counting of ballots.
I'll second that. I'll second Commissioner Scholl's motion on that.
Okay. Other discussion? All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Any other changes to previous to section 4, Commissioner Scholes?
No.
Okay. All right, so so going back to section 4 general, under section under what will be subsection B, I suppose, depending on how we finalize the edit. So it currently reads with the executive director's edits during events that meet the critical criteria above for each hour worked in excess of a 35-hour work week, exempt employees will accrue 1.5 hours. I'm fine with striking the example in the language, but I would suggest that we change it to say 1 hour versus 1.5.
And what's the basis for the 1.5? That's what I'm trying to.
The 1.5, as I mentioned, has been the longstanding practice here since I started here in 2000, and to my knowledge, it was even in place for at least a decade before that. Probably since the early 80s. I mean, since the late 80s. So the reasoning for that is that the staff, they do work, for example, extended hours. So they work, for example, 12 hours, 11 hours on some days. If there is training going on in the evening, they have to be here during the day to conduct their regular duties. For example, if I have the individual running the mail ballot room, he has to be available at 8 in the morning to go to the post office, process the ballots, run them through certification, scan them, but then also be available to do training at 7 o'clock in the evening or 6 o'clock in the evening somewhere else in the state, where generally you have to load up equipment and transfer it. Or it could be a higher volume of mail ballots closer to election day, where we have to extend the processing time until 7, 8 o'clock at night, because we are here late on many nights other than on election night, leading up to election night. And also in addition to the post-election activities we have, such as the recounts and the post-election audits. When these staff, they have to work all those extended hours that day, they cannot get comp time if they don't work 35 hours in that week. So for example, if they work 11 hours each day and they only end up with 35 hours, 11, 12 hours, they only end up with 35 hours that week, that there's no comp time accrued, because they've met their hours worked in those 3 days. However, if they work over the 35 hours in the week, the practice has been 1.5 to the 1 hour. And again, that's what the Secretary of State's handbook, which I also distributed to the committee, also provides to Secretary of State employees as well.
I would just like to add to what Miguel said. If someone's working more than 35 hours, the person's entitled to time and a half, for 1.5 times their hourly rate. So when you ask for somebody to say working the comp time for 1.5, that would be equivalent to somebody being paid time and a half for working more than the 40 hours or 35 hours a week. So it's only fair that a person would be given comp time equal to 1.5 times. Because otherwise, we'd have to pay them 1.5 times their hourly rate.
I mean, for me, I might agree with that if we were talking about a 40-hour week. But we're talking about a 35-hour week. So even those first 5 hours, we're compensating at 1.5 times when that really doesn't kick in until a 40-hour work week.
I mean, are we being paid a lunch hour?
I don't
No.
know.
Okay.
How that
No, it's an 8-hour workday with a 1 hour lunch. So it's
works. The 7 hours.
8 to 4 with a 1 hour lunch.
So while I understand that this is not me not me diminishing it at all, the work that the staff is doing is certainly is appreciated, and I understand. That's why we want to have something so they know what they can rely on versus with nothing, it could completely go away with a different executive director. So not that I expect you going anywhere, Miguel. However, the 1.5 times is generally not for positions like this, exempt positions, only for, or I might have that backwards, non-exempt. But generally, if you're hourly, yes, certainly over your normal hours, you would get 1.5. However, that's not what this type of position is. And further, while there may be the Secretary of State's office may choose to do that, I guess if I look at this in totality, and this is the way I'm looking at it, if we take in combination the 1.5 hours and 375 hours of total comp time, which has been suggested by the executive director, that is the equivalent of 11 weeks. And that is a concern for me. Over 18 months, you could be losing somebody for 11 weeks. I don't think and I'm not suggesting we do less than an hour. I think an hour for an hour. You give an extra hour, you get an hour. So that's all I'm suggesting.
Well, let's talk about the compensatory time. They're not taking 11 weeks off straight. I mean, they're taking time off. The compensatory time is when there's a slowdown during the summer. There's nothing being done. That's when compensatory time comes in. When the person wants to take maybe a 3-day weekend, the executive director will approve that compensatory time. So we're not talking about 11 weeks out for a vacation or something. We're just talking about an extra time here, or maybe an extra 2 or 3 days here and there, only during the slow time. They're not going to take the time, compensatory time during the busy season. We're talking about in the slow season when they take the compensatory time. So it averages out over the course of the year. The other thing, the reason you want a compensatory time is to motivate the workforce. You want to increase the morale of people working at the Board of Elections. This is not a normal agency or department where someone clocks in at 5 and checks out clocks in at 9 and checks out at 5. And sometimes they have to work long hours, especially preparing for an election or doing a recount. So we need that flexibility. It served us well for the last 50, 60 years. Okay, I don't see why we have to change it at this point.
So Commissioner Schultz, thank you for that. I agree with the sentiment of what you're expressing. we're not changing anything. There's no policy that exists. This is what we're doing here. So I'm going to make a motion to,
I want one
Okay.
other question, Chairman.
sure,
Sorry. Miguel, do you have an idea of what the average amount of compensatory time somebody would earn during election season? And
I
I know
do.
it probably varies from employee to employee, but is there a general average of how many hours it is?
Yes, I can go into that. I've been crunching the numbers on this, but I will add that, one of the things that doing this for as many years as I have in different, very different aspects of the elections process is that during election time, the staff and myself included during those years, worked tremendous amount of hours, long days. When you get home after the primary into the general election, when your kids are saying to you, "What are you doing home?" Because they're not used to seeing you at home. So as a father, as a member of the community, and just like our other staff members are, I've missed many ballet practices and baseball games and soccer games and things to that like because I was tied down doing what I wanted to do, which was running the election, which I was compensated to be doing. But that comes at a cost to obviously our personal lives. So if we spend 11 hours here in this building or out in the field representing the board, there is a cost to that on a personal level. And I think that the 1.5 hours was meant to sort of compensate for those extra long days and weeks and weeks and weeks into the season, particularly during presidential election years, when if you're getting 1 hour per 1 hour, you're getting that on an off year, taking a day off. But it's not an equal hour to what you lost during the busy election time is the comparison I'm trying to make. And the other comparison is, generally speaking, the positions here, which I know we're working on that as a separate agenda item, but which I'll update the board at a future meeting, but the compensation has generally been less than the Secretary of State over the years that I've been with the board, just generally because the position here at the board is generally longer term. Folks stay with the board a long time, whereas the Secretary of State is a political office, which can change every 4 years, and you don't know if you're going to have a job any time an election is held for the Secretary of State. So that being said, with the compensatory time and that security, that has made up for the lower pay than the comparable work that's done at the Secretary of State's office. But in terms of the analysis that the board asked me to do, I have some numbers up here. So the average, and I included only the elections staff. I didn't include the campaign finance staff because I wanted you to get a realistic picture of elections for the election staff specifically. The 2018 primary, for example, the average would be 150 hours of comp time for the primary. And then if you notice for the non-president, for the general election, that would generally go down for the most part because a lot of the prep work, a lot of the training has been done in bulk for the primary. So there are fewer hours generally needed for the subsequent general election because we go right into it. For 2020, obviously, that was a year that was challenging for everyone. So certainly, the average accrual was up above 140 hours for the general election. And then for 2022, being a non presidential year, again, the hours were about 100 hours on average for the general election in 2022. And then, given in 2024 how we were obviously short-staffed, there was a tremendous amount of turnover. We lost 3 staff members at the board and had to replace them. And we were working with one less staff member on the election side. Comp time, the average did go up in 2024 just because of the extra hours folks had to put in because of the fewer staff members on board. Over the next screen, you have the average compensatory time by year accrued. So I marked the 375 mark there. And the average in 2018 and the gubernatorial elections 2018 and 2022 is well below the 375, but it does spike up in this presidential election years when we have the 3 statewide elections, the presidential preference primary in April, and then the regular primary and the general election. So that's how I got to the 375 number. I do still have a couple of concerns about that 375. One of the things that concerns me is that in 2021, we had a statewide special referendum. And that was done after the pandemic, where the General Assembly did not decide on which questions would be placed on the ballot for the state ballot. And we had to hold a statewide special referendum in March of 2021. So that obviously took time away from the staff in order to be able to discharge their compensatory time like they normally would after a presidential election. Then we also had in 2023, as you know, with CD1, we had the primary and the general election for the CD1 election, and that pretty much absorbed the entire, between the nominations process in June all the way through into the end of the year, that pretty much consumed the staff. And that led to the staff not being able to discharge the hours that they had accrued in 2022 because of the 2023 special elections. So that is my only concern, is that even at 375, I think that there should be there might be a need to have at least some variance where the director, or either to notify the board or to request from the board to increase that temporarily due to circumstances such as a special election or statewide special election.
So just to follow this, let's say the average was 300 hours, that's really 200 hours worked, but you're figuring at 1.5.
Correct, yes. So, and then here I can, just point out to you how these two special elections wedged in there between 2021 and 22 and then 2022 and 2024 drive up the number of compensation hours. The highest amount of compensation hours, obviously anything beyond that red line going forward, if that was the cap, would be non-existent in this chart. It would cut off at the 375. So certainly having that cap does put a limit on it, but I do think that in some circumstances, as you can see from the chart, after 2021 and 2023, the numbers just simply are up there because they haven't had the opportunity to discharge them, because we've been from one election cycle to another. And having that flexibility to be able to increase that cap or request from the board to increase it temporarily due to circumstances, I think that would be beneficial.
And does the secretary cap, I know that they are 1.5, but do they cap compensation hours?
They do not, to my knowledge.
Miguel, would it be more reasonable to increase the cap to 450? Because as it says now, the maximum balance of compensatory time is that 375. But if you increase it to 450 and add the language that that's the maximum time without express board approval. So to give you an extra leeway, an extra 75 hours there.
That would be beneficial. We've put in place practices to limit the amount of compensatory time to once we bring another staff member on. I don't see these amounts. I don't see them. I see them going down, well below that 375. However, when we get put into circumstances that we have to conduct a special election, if it's a senatorial, congressional, or a special referendum statewide, or this constitutional convention, which we almost had to conduct if it would have been approved by voters, we do need some flexibility to just bump it up temporarily. And I know that this proposed policy, which Ray assisted in drafting as well, is also gives an extra 6 months that the director can provide if there is not enough time. But it is an issue, as you can see on the chart, where after these special elections, these significantly sized special elections, that the staff just doesn't have the time to discharge the time. They don't have the time sometimes to discharge the time, the vacation time that they have, which at times they do lose. So That is my concern, is that there should probably be some flexibility to increase the cap at least for a small amount of time. That way, and the board can be aware of it, either notified of it or requested to increase the cap at least temporarily in special circumstances.
So I make a motion that the language in subparagraph B, 5B reads as follows. The maximum balance of the compensatory time, can't quite read what it says, compensatory time or overtime exempt employees without board approval shall have reached the increase to 450 hours.
So you want to change the 375 to 450?
Yeah, because it talks about the maximum.
Yeah.
This one talks about maximum, but anything above that, you need
I
board
was looking to
approval.
lower the 375, to be honest. So I don't know where that puts us. There is a motion,
Okay.
so I don't know if this is.
A second.
I'm not about to second.
Okay, not hearing one then. All these are great. This is all excellent detail. And again, I appreciate everyone's work on this. Ray, thank you for your work on this as well. I have no issue with section 5D. I think that's fine to increase it to 18 months based on what we've talked about here.
So I have a little bit of a concern on the 18 months as well.
Okay, well, look, I'm going to start at the top.
Okay.
That's all right, I'm going to go.
Okay.
So the motion I would like to make is to modify section as it's presented to us, because that was added. So section 4B to indicate accruing 1 hour, not 1.5. And also in section 5A, similarly, striking what was added and returning back an hour for hour basis. And I'm okay striking the subsection BI in general with the example, if that just makes it ambiguous.
And I just put this out for consideration. Would the board consider changing, once we get to these, this 40 or 45 hour work week, that 1 hour changed to 1.5, I wouldn't have a big problem with that. But I'd certainly second the 1 hour at this point for 35. But I might suggest a modification to indicate that, once you go over those higher numbers, that higher threshold,
Okay,
that we increase it to 1.5.
that's fair. I'm happy to.
Which would be my suggestion, and I would do that either based at 40 or 45. I consider either one, but I'll certainly second your motion, particularly for purposes of.
Well, in that case, I will modify my motion. I will keep 5A as compensatory time is earned on an hour for hour basis, as previously mentioned. I will strike section 4BI, which is the example, and modify 4B to read during the events that meet the criteria above for each hour worked in excess of a 35-hour work week, exempt employees will accrue 1 hour of compensatory time and any time in excess of 45 hours. So I'm going to write this as I talk. 45 hours, exempt employees will accrue 1.5 hours of compensatory time. We have a motion and a second discussion.
So, you're not valuing your employees' labor. I mean, they put in time in and they put in effort in here. If they ask someone to come here and work long hours, okay, so they take time away from their families to work, say, 60 hours on election week, or for 2 or 3 weeks and take care of all the special elections. You understand, we're only going to value your time at regular time. Okay, that's short-sighted. Okay, that's not fair to the employees. If they were in private business, they would be paid time and a half.
I'm trying to.
Commissioner Schultz, you're
I'm trying to be
incorrect.
ti- No, I'm not.
You're incorrect. That is not
I'm
true.
trying to be fair, but don't make this about
Yeah.
somebody being unfair to the employees.
Well-
We're trying to craft something that everyone can rely on, that isn't at the whim of the director.
We're not at the whim of the
Someone
director.
else. It is right now.
It's never
It
been
is
at the
right
whim
now.
of the director.
Well, it is right now.
You have any evidence that it's been at the whim of a director?
Yes, you know what the evidence is? We don't have a written policy.
Well, the policy has been reasonable. Okay? It may have
But
been,
but it's
it may have
nowhere in
been,
writing.
there may have been an unwritten policy, but it was surely a reasonable policy.
Okay.
Okay? This agency was
I'm
work,
not saying it was
this
an
agency,
unreasonable
this
policy.
agency was worked fine.
Mhm.
Okay? Worked like clockwork for years. Okay? Nobody had said anything that otherwise. Okay? You want to put it in writing, well, you give the director enough room for him to deploy his employees in a
We
manner
haven't gotten to that
that
point yet.
carries out the functions of this board.
Well, we haven't gotten to that point
Well,
yet.
no, you're saying only give them 1 hour compensatory for every hour over
Up
the
to
35.
40.
Yeah,
For the first 5 hours, yep, it's an hour for
but
an
they're
hour.
only getting paid for 35 hours. Is that right, Miguel? They work 40 hours, but they only get
They
paid.
don't work 40 hours.
You,
They
They
do
don't
not
get paid-
work 40
They work
hours.
35 hours.
They do not work 40 hours. They
Well-
work 35 hours.
Yeah, 35 hours.
Okay.
Yeah. And
And,
if-
and we're suggesting that for the first 5 hours, it's paid at 1 per 1. And when it gets over 40, which is what the Labor Department deems overtime, they get 1.5 hours.
Yeah.
We're not trying to be unfair,
But-
but that's why I have a problem there, because you're characterizing it as we're trying to be unfair to the employees, and we're not.
But you don't understand the function of this board and what these people are doing, okay? So I
Well,
think.
maybe you can explain
No,
the function of the board to me then.
well, you've been on the board a lot of time. You know what we've been doing here, all the elections we run, all the hours you put in, okay? People are here on election day at 10, 11, or 12 o'clock to get the stuff out, okay? You need people to work that. And you need people to be motivated to come in the next day to do it. Okay, you can put your plan over here, 1 hour for every hour there. Next election comes in, they're gonna say, why should I work? Why should I be here? Why should I take out time for my family to be over here? Okay, it's 6 o'clock, I'm leaving. Okay, you're the members of the board, you take care of it. That's not right. That's why this practice has been in place for years. We've never had a problem. Now there's a problem. I don't understand it, but I can't vote for your position. It's just not fair to the employees of this department.
Well, I appreciate your viewpoint, but to suggest that either myself or Commissioner DeSimone don't value the work that this board does. I was in the Board of Canvassers in Cranston for 9 years. I was in the trenches. I saw what people did. So I understand the work that they're doing. So I think that's the intimation you're making, that we don't understand that or not being fair. I think it's not just about fairness to one particular person. It's overall fairness of what this particular policy is meant to do. Plus, if another executive director came in, they could say there's no comp time.
Correct.
Where does that leave the employees? That's certainly not fair. We're putting something in writing that we could all abide by. And I'm sorry that if you think that's unfair, I appreciate your opinion, but I disagree. So the motion on the motion on the floor, and by the way, just to clarify, was anything over 45 hours for 1.5. And so we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
can I
Aye.
just clarify
No.
with that? Because you mentioned 1/40 and
I-
we have two
My-
different,
sorry.
He did make the motion at 45, and I did second it, so I.
Okay.
agree to that.
so is it over 45 then?
One up to 45 and 1.5 over.
Okay.
So 30, essentially the mechanism is 35 to 45, you get 1 hour. Everything over 45, you get 1.5 hour. So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I
Opposed?
vote no.
Okay. We've got 2 in favor, 1 opposed. So that being said, Commissioner DeSimone, did you have some thoughts on 5B? which-
Well, I think that because of that, I think B would automatically be lower than the 375. I think it's probably closer to 300 hours, just doing my math in
Okay.
my head.
Would you like to make that?
And I would make a motion to cap it at 300 hours with the ability for the director to increase those hours if the need should be. And he doesn't have to report to us before he does it, but he would just let us know that he did it. So I'm not trying to hamstring him in any way. So I would suggest some language that indicates that the director would have the ability to increase the number beyond 300 hours as needed. I trust the director to be able to do that.
Mr. DeSimone, do you have any criteria for that? I mean, it's, if you just say you can increase it, it doesn't leave the
I
director with much.
I would suggest that the director would have a responsibility to do that on an as-need basis and just wouldn't be able to do it offhand. And once it was reported to us, we'd be able to review it. I'd want to be able to review it, for example, at the end of the election cycle. Unless somebody suggests some criteria. I mean, council, I'd certainly be happy to listen to criteria that you would suggest for language.
This
Just
is
like-
just being presented now. I
Yeah.
could for your next meeting, or Miguel and I could speak about it, but I don't have
mean, that's
anything.
fine. I don't, off the top of my head, I don't have any either, right? So,
I just don't think you should
right.
have it just open-ended. It doesn't help the director. It doesn't help anybody.
What is the criteria you're thinking of where you would need to
I'm
extend
thinking
it?
of a situation where he has a group of employees that all have 300 and he can't get any employees. So for example, you have a special election, say, then we have a primary, and you've got employees that have already worked 290 hours, and now we have the general, right? They've got their
Yeah.
compensatory time from the first two elections, or from a special and a primary, and now they're all at close to 300 and he can't staff the building for the general.
Yeah.
That would be my concern.
So would
So
you,
we'd have to let them go over the 300 at that point.
would it, as a suggestion, maybe we change the existing to 300, but indicate that if in a year there's a special election, they have the ability to earn 350, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I would suggest a special election or some other event that has triggered too many employees being close to the cap, and he needs it for staffing. That's my concern. So yeah, when there's a special election, I would say that's probably good language, Chairman.
So I'm just writing here.
What would the max be in that?
350.
Is there a max, or do you want to leave it open?
What to mean, to go beyond it?
Yeah.
350?
I'd say maybe 350.
But I don't think that, I want to speak for the board's attorney, but I think we can probably craft something quickly here just to say, in a year where there is a special election, exempt employees may maintain any time over 350 hours. Or something to that effect.
That's fine.
No,
I'll
I will point out that we have at least 2 staff members that are over that limit right now. So some provision, I think, has to be put into place to grandfather that time in somehow. Because they've been under the expectation that they have until the next general election cycle to discharge that, which is roughly 18 months. So I think we have to put into some sort of provision that once they go below that number, they can't go back up beyond it. Something to that nature.
Or I'll take a note. I think we can just add something at the end for that. So I'll make it based on what we've talked about, make a motion to say the maximum balance of compensatory time. Sorry, this is section 5B. The maximum balance of compensatory time and overtime exempt employee may maintain at any time is 300 hours for a 35-hour work week, period, end of sentence. In a year where there's a special election, the maximum balance of compensatory time and overtime exempt employee may maintain at any time is 350 hours for a 35-hour work week. That's in a form of a motion.
I'll second that motion.
Other discussion?
Yes, discussion, okay. What happens in a situation where we have a small staff here, that there are people who are out because of sickness or people quit, and now you only have a smaller staff, and you ask them to work longer hours, and they bump up beyond this. What happens to this agency, to the administration of the elections? It just ceases? What do you do? Because you have a policy here. You can't go beyond that. What does the director do? How does he run? How does he administer the elections? When he's bumping up against this time. Okay? I don't understand how it works. we want to give a lot of flexibility to the director to maintain these elections on time, okay, without a problem, okay, without any hiccups. And you're basically saying, as long as you have a full staff here and everybody's fine, this is going to be the maximum. But when staff is out for whatever reason, a death in the family, sickness, somebody quits, whatever, now you have a small staff doing more work. Okay? So I think this is short-sighted. I can't support that.
But the suggestion was 375.
I know, but
It's
it
going
is,
down to 350, but by its very nature, if you lower the hour and a half to an hour in some cases, you're gonna have lower numbers, right? I mean, that's just the math.
well, that's why I wanted to increase it to 450.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
I
Any other discussion?
Without court, without board approval, okay? Anything above that, board approval.
Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
What's
Opposed?
the motion?
The motion made was,
I'm happy to repeat it if.
Yes.
So the motion made, and I presume passes because we've got two ayes with no, I'm presuming one no, but is section 5B, the maximum balance of compensatory time and overtime exempt employee may maintain at any time is 300 hours for a 35-hour work week, period, end of sentence. In a year where there's a special election, the maximum balance of compensatory time and overtime exempt employee may maintain at any time is 350 hours for a 35-hour work week.
Okay, I vote no.
Okay, that's 2 ayes, 1 no. The motion passes. Section 5C, I would make a motion to accept the change that was added here. Requests by employees must be made in advance sufficient to accommodate the staffing needs of the board. All requests must be approved in advance by the executive director. Do I have a second?
I'll second it. That's the language they
Yes.
requested, correct? Yeah.
Any discussion?
Wait a minute, that's 5E?
C.
5C.
Oh, 5C.
5C.
Miguel, what's your position in 5C?
That is currently our practice. So, I mean, we tightly control comp time, but no one is accruing comp time since essentially since November, since Thanksgiving, since the RLA was completed. So if there is any comp time from between now and next July, or, you know, then it clearly has to be approved by me. And then even in the election time, I approve comp time from any of the staff members before it occurs.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it. Section 5D is next. Commissioner DeSimone, did you have some thoughts on this?
I just had a question. Miguel, does the 18 months run you into a problem with the following election?
If it's November, then no, it should not, because that generally would end up, for example, 18 months would be about May of 2026, I believe.
And even if it's a presidential, it's not going to hurt you in any way?
I mean, it's certainly, it does give me the leeway to extend it by 26 months, but if by definition it was the 24 months, then it would assist, especially if we're moving into a presidential preference primary after, for example, the 2026 gubernatorial election. 18 months into that, we would be into the PPP. We'd be
And
into
then you could extend it if you needed to under this language. right?
Well, this language says unforeseen circumstance. I mean, we could foresee that we had a PPP coming up. So some additional time would probably be beneficial in that case, because we do have that tighter window between the two, the gubernatorial and the presidential preference primary.
But the way this is worded, it gives you the ability to do that.
But it does say unforeseen and extraordinary. I don't know if that would, if we expect the PPP to happen.
Yeah, that's fully anticipated. It's in your statutory framework. That would not be what's contemplated by extraordinary, that would be
Yeah,
outside
that
of
would
that.
be my only concern. I wouldn't want to short that every 4 years would be a concern, but otherwise I think the language is great.
When do we add in the language for administration of elections? Right after circumstances.
Or we could add in the presidential preference primary. Language.
Well, there could be special private,
Yeah,
special
it could be a
referendum.
statewide
Okay.
referendum too, which I know Miguel mentioned earlier, so I want to make sure we covered
Okay, well,
like
we'll call it a
those.
special election then, but the primary wouldn't, Ray, would the presidential preference primary not be considered a special election, or would that be considered a special election?
It's not special.
So we'd
It's-
have to make it both. We'd
it's
have to
right in
put
your
both I
calendar.
think. Put in PPP and special election.
No, I just put in and for administration of elections, then it covers everything.
I guess.
How, could we suggest here, say, at the discretion of the executive director with, I don't think at the 6 months, he needs to have our authority, but with alerting the board, I'm not sure the right word is there, but, by informing the board that he's doing it.
Well, then he could extend it however he wants.
Would that work for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think
Because then you
the,
wouldn't have to worry about extraordinary.
the safety valve here is that once you get beyond that 18 months, which is within the director's discretion, if there are any reasons whatsoever that would warrant extending it, the director comes before you, explains that, and then you actually consent to it. So it's,
Okay, so
you have
think
that kind of flexibility with this language.
Language is good as it sits?
I do,
Okay.
I do, because
Okay,
Okay.
then I
the
can-
flexibilities with the director coming before you and explaining exactly what exists.
Then I'm certainly satisfied. Okay.
Well, I think the issue, which Lou, I think you raised, is that right now it's a default of 18 months. However, I can extend it for 6 months due to extraordinary or unforeseen circumstances. And if I want to go beyond these additional 6 months, I have to come before the board. So my concern is that if I need to have unforeseen circumstances and extraordinary circumstances to extend it beyond the 18 months without board permission, that could bump up into the presidential preference primary, because I believe 18 months from November of 2026 would be roughly February or March of 2028.
But wouldn't you would only need board permission if you go beyond the 24 months.
24.
Because it says
Correct.
it should extraordinary circumstances
But
warrant
I
a
think-
further extension.
Oh, I see what he's saying. though.
I think what
He's saying
Davis-
He needs an unforeseen event to extend it 6 months.
Yes,
Yes.
that's the issue.
Yeah, that would be outside of an election cycle. That would be, for example, a medical leave, things of that nature.
So I think Commissioner Scholes had suggested something along the conduct of a statewide election.
Yeah.
Add that in as a criteria that I have to extend it due to the conduct of a special election or statewide election or something along those lines, which the PPP would be.
What if we added language or? What if we added language or statewide election after extraordinary circumstances?
I think that would be fine.
That takes out the special election, like in some small community where 600 people vote. And
Mhm.
but it includes a statewide election, which could be a constitutional referendum or something like that. So
Correct.
that would give you a little extra leeway, just adding that in. That'd be any statewide election. You wouldn't need to come to us for that.
Do you want to just repeat that and make it a form of a motion?
I'll make that in the form of a motion that we accept that language, but we add after the term extraordinary circumstances or the language or statewide election.
Extraordinary circumstances in this first sentence, I presume,
Correct. I'm sorry. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. or statewide. I will second that. Any just further discussion? All those in favor?
All right.
Aye. Ayes have it. Okay. We're getting down to the bottom here. So section 5K, I'll make a motion to accept the language as it is modified here. Versus unless otherwise prohibited by law, the board expressly reserves the right to unilaterally modify this policy without notice. Which,
I'll second it.
discussion? Hearing none. All
Well,
those,
it should be,
go ahead.
Ray, can you comment on that?
Yeah, there's no contractual obligation that is done by this policy. You have the ability to change it as you see fit. So there's the concept of reliance. I think you basically can't rely upon what was in place. It's whatever the board wants for a policy.
Okay, so we can change it or have exceptions to this policy?
Right, right. So I mean, way back, there was a case, Roy versus Woonsocket Savings, back in the late 80s, that warned employers that when you have, for example, a handbook and you create policies within the handbook, an employee can actually view that as a contractual obligation. So at the beginning of the handbook, it always says that the employer reserves the right to waive it as they see fit, so that it can't be viewed as a contractual obligation.
But it's fair to say that if we were to modify, we'd come back through this process. So it's not like we can't as the board, we would have to make it as a motion.
The board can only act in that
Yeah,
way. The
so-
board has no capacity other than to have a vote on it. That's right.
So Ray, just thinking this thing through, this entire policy is a contractual obligation?
No, it's a policy, and it's just like with the Department of Administration, it has, for better or worse, the employer has the flexibility to change it whenever they want. You could change this tomorrow. It's
Yeah,
a
Ray, and
policy.
just adding off that, Ray, if you look at what the secretary provided in their policy, the last line of the first paragraph says, policies set forth in this manual are not intended to create a contract, nor are they intended to be construed as a contractual obligation of any kind.
It's standard to make sure that everyone knows that the employer has the ability to change it, because it's not straight compensation. It's a policy being provided.
Thank you.
Did you already review the first page before I got here? I assume you did.
We
Okay.
did. We might have to go back. We didn't specifically accept but we can go back and accept those changes in a moment. But we have a motion on the floor. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, that's ayes have it, 3-0. Okay, so I do want to mention the grandfather thing in a moment to just, when we go back to, so the first page, so in a form of a motion, section 1A, accept the changes there, which just literally,
So moved.
all right. Any discussion? All's in favor?
Aye,
Aye.
and we already modified section B, Ray.
Okay.
And then section 3 has changes in both 3A and 3B. I'll make a motion to accept those as well as presented here.
So moved. Those are just name changes. So-
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All's in favor?
Aye.
But
Aye.
have you
Opposed?
did you discuss the other issue that I raised as well as that's already been discussed with?
The administration of elections.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's part of this motion?
I believe they already did it before you got
Okay,
here
so there's,
to,
all right. So they've
to
already,
not require an emergency in order for the compensatory time
Yes.
to be accrued.
that's already
We
been
did-
done?
We added that in right after emergency, Ray.
Okay.
The language that
Yeah.
Miguel told us you discussed.
So,
That was under subparagraph B. I think, Dave, that was your.
yeah, to add to the language, or time critical preparation for elections, counting and tallying ballots. Should cover it.
So just to be clear, any opposed to the last motion, which was to accept 3A and B as hearing none opposed, I guess I'll pass. And then finally, I think I would propose that we add related to Miguel's concerns and certainly open for discussion, but I'll make a motion just for the sake of discussion. So under 5, section 5, add a section L. And I just wrote this language now so we can modify it, but any exempt employee with existing time over, I'm sorry, any staff or exempt employee with existing time over 300 hours will be reduced to 300 hours as of September 1st, 2025. that gives 7 months to reduce. Now, I make that in the form of a motion for the purpose of discussion and be willing to discuss modifying that, but do I have a second?
I'll give you a second. Does that make sense, Miguel?
I would want to make sure you have enough time, 7 months, to get whoever's over 300 down to 300.
September 1 makes sense. It should be later than that.
I would feel more comfortable, I mean, with at least the end of the year, with the holidays and everything.
December 31.
Sure.
Yes.
So I'll modify my motion to say any exempt employee with the existing time over 300 hours will have their compensatory hours reduced to 300 as of December 1st, 2025. Or do I need to
December-
say
I think it should
current?
be December
Sorry,
31.
31st, sorry,
right,
31st. Should we say, because I don't want that to allow anyone to go over 300 at this point, which I don't think you would this year because there's no election, but would that cover us to?
I'll read it, I'll consider, but yes, from what you're reading, it does seem like it would allow the director to have staff bring the hours down to 300 by year end.
But not accrue more than 300 at this point.
It would be capped. You're saying it would be capped?
Yeah.
So you're basically resetting everybody January 1, 2026 to a maximum of 300. So you're coming in, anyone who had 400 the year before, whether they're accruing it, as well as having it in the bank, as of December 31, it gets dropped down to 300. I think that's what you're saying.
Well, what I was, sorry, just
So
to be
that
clear,
would-
I was saying that at this moment, if somebody has over 300, they have to get down to 300 by December
By December
31st.
31.
Now, if somebody has 100 now, they can't, I mean, again, I don't think there's a lot of comp time being earned this year, but they can't suddenly earn 400 additional comp time hours. But if this,
Right, you're talking about existing employees.
Yeah, this
Yes,
would
yes.
just be a cap.
Okay.
And it basically reset that person to 300 on January 1, whatever they do this year.
And it gives that employee or staff member an opportunity to take those, it gives them,
Right, unless I think what the chair is saying is, I'm not suggesting that you're raising everybody to 300. I'm just saying that
Right.
you have whatever you have, but it cannot exceed
Mhm.
that 300 level.
Okay.
I'd like to ask the executive director a question. How many employees have more than 300 hours as of today?
I am going to say we have two that have over 300 hours.
So how many hours over would you estimate? Approximately.
One by 200 over, I would say, and the other about 85 to 90 hours over.
So these people will be notified that they have to use that comp time before the end of the year.
Under this policy,
Yeah, yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Was there a second on that? I'm sorry, on that, the revised motion?
I'll make it a second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Okay.
Abstain.
Or abstain, okay, sorry. 2, 4, 1 abstention. And then finally, I will just make a motion to pass the policy as changed today in this meeting up to the full board for a consideration and a vote.
So moved. I mean, I think that was the intent of the committee
Yeah.
anyway.
Have a motion, a second? Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. All right, second item, item number 2 was the compensation committee may discuss and vote on recommendations to the board, the adoption of modifications of job titles and compensation of staff. And I think the executive director said he needed a bit more time to prepare for that item.
Yes.
Okay, so I think based on that, we'll move to number 3, and we'll put that second agenda item on for a future board meeting when the executive director is ready to review that with us. Any further business?
That's it.
Hearing none, I have a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second,
Second.
all in favor, say aye. All right, we're adjourned at 3:30 PM. Thank you.